with all the hype around Resident Evil Requiem and everyone thirsting over Grandpa Leon, it made me realize that Resident Evil is unlike any other series out there. And that's, I want to dive in. In this video, I want to talk about what makes Resident Evil such a good series, especially today in an era where things suck. Like, the games suck. And they're boring and okay, all right, calm down. Games aren't boring. But a lot of games are corporate now. And they're made to sell copies and not please fans, but Resident Evil is not like that. And let's just dive straight into it. So firstly, what makes Resident Evil so great is that it is the only series that has real-time aging and a timeline that actually progresses with our real lives. You know, Leon is old because in Resident Evil 2, he was a young man, and now we're all old, we're all unk. Everyone who played the originals is just like grey and kind of fed up with life. And, you know, this is part of what makes Resident Evil such a great series. It's these characters have a real life, they have things going on in the background, they're not some kind of superhumans, and they actually get older, they age, they change. I mean, if you look at Chris Redfield in the first game versus 5, where he's just kicking the zombies in the head and stuff, you know, it's a completely different person. They change careers, they change jobs based on the lore. You know, Leon and some of these characters are working for the very kind of people who in the first game, Umbrella, caused all the whole mess. And, you know, in a roundabout way, if you kind of like look into it, it all ties together, and that is so cool. It's like one of the best things about Resident Evil as a series, and just that I don't know really any other series that make such a good job of that aspect. Now, that also ties into the fact that with each game, so we float around these characters, but the gameplay also evolves. It's not just it's not just like the background lore and the time with the characters and blah 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 that I just talked about. The gameplay, if you look at say Resident Evil 1, it's a isometric top-down game that, you know, did what it had to because of the PlayStation 1. It was scary because you didn't know what was going to come shuffling in off of the side of the static camera angle. But then you get to Resident Evil 4, and that changes everything. It goes to third-person, more action horror, and everyone was like, whoa. I mean, I remember getting Did anyone else have the Resident Evil 4 GameCube? Like the grey with the silver one? I sold that. I really wish I'd held onto it. But, you know, that changed things up, and 4 became a lot of people's entry point to this series, but also just fell in love with it. Then you go to 5, a game that people didn't like, but that was 4, but with added co-op, and yeah, okay, Sheva was annoying, and she kept falling into pits and stuff, and she'd be like, Sheva, but let's be real, like, that was an attempt to push the series forward. Now, I played it co-op, and I enjoyed it with my friends at the time. Then you go to 6, and it expanded on the formula. Again, a lot of people didn't like 6, but you see in 6 that they tried to, with each campaign, try something different. Leon's campaign was, Chris's campaign was a lot more action-oriented. Leon's was a bit more traditional Resident Evil 4 style. And that's what they did. It didn't quite, you know, all come together great, but you can see the beginnings of where they were going to take the series. Because then in 7, we have the first-person, basically horror game. It goes back to its roots with puzzles and all of that great stuff, like in the original trilogy. But we also have this kind of expansion of the formula into a horror kind of running away from the creepy family, and then the story in the back. And we had a new character in Ethan. And that is like, this is where we're seeing this all come together. This is what makes Resident Evil so great. They have not just continued the same stuff over and over, but we'll talk more about that in a bit. Obviously, going to 8, we then have Ethan in Village, and that takes the 7 formula of being horror, adds a bit more action, and now we're at Requiem, which is, again, a split between Leon and Grace. But something that also makes this series so great is how spot on they are with the villains they create. You know, in the originals and at the beginning, it was Wesker until he got kicked out the back of that huge plane. And Wesker was a bad guy and he was working for Umbrella. And he was a pretty cool villain at the time, campy and silly, but fun. They didn't try to take themselves too seriously. Then we move on, and we have Jack and the family in 7, and as villains, there's, I think, no more iconic modern kind of, it's very, I wouldn't say one is better than the other, but with 7, when Jack is like putting the axe through the walls, it's very much the Shining esque, and it's scary in its own way, and it's just very prominent. These are villains that you don't forget, and even moving on to like Lady Dimitri's. Okay, Lady D. We're gonna just call her Lady D. And how she stands on you, and how everyone started thirsting over her, and Vampire Mummy. It's just like, these are all like, you don't even have to go, oh yeah, who was that? These villains are just so perfect, even if they're not running. Like, Wesker ran through it a buttload of games, but these others are just in one game. And it's just a testament to why Resident Evil resonates with fans, I think, and how Capcom really put effort and time into making everyone so unique. And talking about Capcom, it kind of brings me to my final major point about why Resident Evil is just unlike any other series out there. And that's that it's one of the only franchises left that just doesn't spam us year on year with the same old formula, the same old games, Call of Duty style, or even Assassin's Creed style, It doesn't have to be a shooting game. Like, a lot of other developers, if they had a hit like Resident Evil, they'd be like, you know what, let's just throw as many games out there as possible. Each game has its own unique angle, and I think even the great thing is, even the side games like Revelations, and if you go all the way back to Outbreak, which Grace is now the daughter of one of the people who survived the Outbreak game. Like, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Capcom sit down and they go, this is what's happened in the universe, and what interesting ways can we use this and do this. And in Revelations, as you're exploring the side lore, and you meet Barry in Revelations 2, and you find out what's going on in previous games that kind of fills in the backstory. Like, this is why Resident Evil is so good, because even the kind of, you could class them as non-main side games, they're not just cheap cash grabs. They're games with thought put into them about, what is this our audience actually going to like? What are Resident Evil fans and gamers and players really interested in? And why? What can we do to, actually drive the series forward? And we're seeing this in some of the talk from the developers about Requiem, and the Leon, and how Leon has basically, gotten older and wiser, and we're going back to Raccoon City, and how he's going to interact with Grace, and how the stories are kind of intertwined, and all the stuff that they haven't told us, I'm sure, will be very interesting. And that's what's great about it, is it's just this. Even the games that didn't do so well, 5 and 6, they're not on the level of, like, say, a bad Call of Duty game like Ghosts, or like a meh Assassin's Creed game. Where other series, like, we'll take Assassin's Creed, for example, where other series, they tried to shift the formula. So with Origins, they made it like an RPG series, and it went from like Assassin to, you have stats and armors and all of this stuff, and all of this DLC you can buy. Resident Evil is like, here's the game. We're going to continue this. We're going to expand the mechanics of the games and things like that. And you might not like it, but they're still not. I would play Resident Evil 5 over a lot of games from other developers still. And I think that's kind of the heart of it. Like, I was looking at Resident Evil Requiem and like, okay, which edition am I going to pre-order? Which, let me just say, this is one, I don't know if you feel the same. Let me know in the comments, but this is one of the only series that I actually pre-order still, because I know that it's going to be worth it, and I want to reward them for actually giving us what we want. I know, even if it's not an amazing Resident Evil game, it's not going to be a cash grab where they've just gone like, haha, we've got your money now. And so I was going through, and I was looking at the deluxe edition, and it's only like $20 more or something. Don't quote me on that. And I was looking at like what you get, and I was like, do I really need this? And I thought, no, you know what? I am going to buy the deluxe edition, because the game doesn't come out every year. It's been a while since Village. It respects our time and us as a community, and it's it gives us. There's going to be stuff in there referring back to the 1996 incident and everything, and it just gives us more. It's not, it's not like, oh, we're locking all of this stuff behind the deluxe edition, or, oh, you want this? It's just skins and things like that, sure, but that's great for people who can't afford the deluxe edition. I don't want people to feel like they're missing out, and for a company in 2026 to not, say, oh, there's an extra level, but only in the deluxe edition and stuff like that. Like they do, like missions are locked away, and Assassin's Creed and all that. I'm gonna keep harping on about that, but that I really like that, and so deluxe edition it is for me. Excited for Resident Evil Requiem. Let me know in the comments if you agree. Which game did you start with as well? Because that's a very good point to all of this, is that there's so many great jumping in points for Resident Evil. You got the originals, you got 4/5/6 era, and then you've got 7, 8, 9 era. And the great thing is that even if you jumped in like last year, you can go back, play the remakes and the other games, and find out the whole backstory to what is actually going on. And that's really interesting. And we will just say as a final point here that the cool thing about Resident Evil is how they haven't just gone, haha, zombies. It's like they've tied it into this bioorganic weapons and experimentation, and taking it back to early explorers in Africa coming across these plants and things like that. They've really kind of done something different. That's not just like zombie outbreak. We don't know. It's so if you're talking about the original in the mid-90s, that is actually a revelation. Like for a game to have that much story to compete with like the likes of Metal Gear Solid, and to have that much thought put into, oh, these aren't just monsters. This is actually what's happening, and you can find the memos and everything, and then you go into 2 and 3, and it continues. Like, that is such a big thing. It's powerful, and it's just why Resident Evil is still unlike any other series. You can play Resident Evil 2 Remake, and then go back to Resident Evil 2 on the PlayStation Store, say, for example, and play the original, like, pixelated 90s version, and still, they're separate. They tie together, and they're overall the same, but you can have a great time with both. And that's something I never do. I hate replaying games. This is one series I just absolutely love. So, Resident Evil Requiem, bring it on. Can't wait. Let me know your thoughts, whether you agree, disagree, in the comments below. And if you're still here, leave a like and subscribe.